This is The Debrief with Tyler Burns.
Right now, a violent attack at Provident Hospital on the south side sent 2 workers to the hospital. Police say one of those workers was stabbed in the chest by a patient in the emergency room. They were taken to the trauma center at University of Chicago Medical Center in fair condition. We don't know how the other worker was hurt or how serious the injuries are. The suspect is now in police custody.
In Hopkinsville, police arrested a woman accused of attacking an ER nurse. This happened Tuesday at Jeannie Stewart Health. Police say Symphony Morgan was receiving treatment at the hospital when she randomly attacked a nurse, dragging her to the floor and stomping on her head. Other nurses were able to restrain Morgan until police arrived. Morgan is charged with assaulting a healthcare provider.
Breaking news overnight and the urgent investigation. 1 officer killed and 5 people wounded in a hostage situation and shootout at a Pennsylvania hospital. ABC's Christian Cordero joins us now from York County. Good morning, Christian.
Good morning, Gio. We're told the officer killed had just turned 30 years old. He responded to this hospital during that active shooter situation that left 5 other victims with gunshot wounds.
Did he hurt somebody with the scissors?
Yes.
He stabbed a nurse?
He went away.
Frantic 911 calls describe the terrifying moments a Palm Beach nurse was brutally attacked on the job. The person believed to be the attacker, a Baker Act patient. We want to warn you, the story you're about to see may be difficult to watch.
Sheriff's Office, 911.
We had a Baker Act beat a staff member unconscious, now running around the building.
Oh, my God.
Urgent 911 calls
It's absolute chaos.
detailing frantic moments.
Okay, where is the injured nurse?
The nurse is in the floor.
The nurse is on the floor. Is she bleeding?
Yes.
I'm on the 3rd floor. There's some guy in here that's nuts.
I still feel like it's unreal. I can't believe this is actually happening.
And as Cindy Joseph and Chris Lyle sit in their attorney's office trying to hold it together, it's hard to believe those 911 calls are talking about their mother.
It's just pretty much unimaginable to me this actually happened while she was at work, somewhere she's worked for over 20 years taking care of patients. I'm still in shock and disbelief.
Last week, investigators say a Palms West nurse, identified by her family as 67-year-old Layla Malal, was, quote, inexplicably attacked by a 33-year-old Baker-acted patient. They say it's Stephen Scantleberry. The affidavit said essentially every bone in the victim's face was broken and that she was likely to lose the use of both eyes. A 911 call also reveals the suspect may have used scissors to attack her.
Scissors?
Yes.
Did he hit somebody with the scissors? Did he hurt somebody with the scissors?
Yes.
He stabbed a nurse?
He went away.
Okay, does he still have the scissors, yes or no?
Yes.
What was going through her head? The pain she felt, the confusion, the trauma she's going to have for this for the rest of her life.
These are photos the family shared of Malal after the attack, showing her eyes swollen shut and bruises throughout her face and collarbone.
She had bleeding in the brain, subdural bleeding and subarachnoid bleeding. She was unconscious, intubated, not responding. The first night was pretty crazy. She was very unstable.
Now the siblings have questions, particularly over a 911 call involving a man who identified himself to dispatchers as the Palms West CEO and what he told dispatchers about the unconscious victim.
You said they assaulted the employee until they passed out? Yeah, unconscious. I'm not worried about that part. I mean, the Baker I dealt with. And this could be nearly a fatality.
I couldn't imagine how heartless that was. How could they say that they didn't care about her, or they cared more about the Baker Act patient than their own nurse who's been there with them for 20 years? And then that comment at the end about how she's probably going to die, that really, really, really hurt me and really hit hard.
All right, this is episode 27 of The Debrief, and my trusty sidekick, aka Robin, aka Cody Randall. Good evening, Cody.
Tired today. I said also known as just tired today.
Yeah. Cody had to work yesterday. He's not very happy. And we have for the third time, maybe fourth time, third time, my wonderful wife, Beth Burns. Hello, Beth. She's super far away.
Click what?
Wait, I think I have one. I have an applause button. Yeah.
It's like I
that's
won a
real nice.
prize. Both of you.
Okay, now it's Tyler
Super
figuring out all
tired.
the little audio buttons.
Except I'm disappointed because the video that I put, actually when I edit this, but for those that are watching or listening, the video that I put at the front, I wanted to play at some point in the middle of this interview, and it wasn't wanting to cooperate. So kind of disappointing. But regardless, nonetheless, today's discussion, well, at least one of the discussions, depending on what else Cody has come up with for today. But this week, we're going to kind of dive into some really hot topics going on right now. And the big issue is attacks on healthcare workers around the country. There has been several within just the month of February alone. And it seems like, in my opinion, and I'm sure I will have some more rants on this as we go on, but in my opinion, it seems like people are getting more and more brave for right now, for lack of a better term, and lack of not wanting to get kicked off of YouTube. People are just not caring about other people, and they just decide things aren't necessarily going their way, and they're wanting to attack. And quite frankly, I'm tired of hearing about it.
Let's choose bold instead of brave.
Bold.
People
are
becoming more
bold. Sounds better.
Yeah.
It's a bold move, Cotton.
Yeah, that way we're not glorifying it.
Well, I definitely don't want to glorify it. I hope every one of these individuals that are responsible for these attacks get exactly what's coming to them in a legal justice type way. Again, not trying to get removed from YouTube. So with that, Beth, I know we've done several introductions. I'm tired. Several introductions on you already. Yes, I did just take a nap, and it was glorious. But why don't you, for a quick recap, why don't you kind of talk about yourself a little bit, what you do, and kind of where you came from, that sort of thing, and then we'll just dive right into all these issues.
So I am a nurse practitioner with a group of trauma surgeons. I primarily work the night shift. We are a center that sees probably 3,000 to 4,000 traumas a year, trauma activations a year. We are a regional medical center, so we see pretty acutely ill folks and very rarely send people to level 1 centers. With that being said, I have been in healthcare. I think this is my 23rd year or something like that. I've been a nurse practitioner for the last 12-ish. A nurse since 2002. Was a tech before that. So I've kind of climbed the proverbial ladder. I also worked as a volunteer briefly as an emergency medical technician. And so I've seen a little bit of outside the hospital and a whole lot of inside the hospital. So that's the brief synopsis, if you will, unless there's something else you wanted me to say.
Oh, that's pretty spot on. So I guess let's kind of kick it off a little bit with these healthcare attacks. I'm just kind of let you take it over for a little bit because I know you've got some notes of things that you want to discuss, and I'll interject with my anger and frustration.
Yeah, so I actually wrote a blog for you that we're hoping to publish soon. I just need to get all of my resources together so that it looks a little bit more proper. With that being said, I wrote it on the 28th. So what was that, yesterday-ish, maybe? I keep saying ish a lot. I don't like that.
It's fine.
So,
I've got a fancy app for that to remove filler words.
I love that so much. So in a 5-day time span, there were 4 episodes of workplace violence that actually made mainstream media, like national headlines. The first one was on February 17th. It was in Chicago, Illinois. It was in an emergency department. There were 2 individuals injured. It was a physician and a physician's assistant. They were stabbed in the chest by the assailant. The second was on February 18th. It was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky at Jenny Stewart Health. A nurse was assaulted by an emergency department patient who was being discharged. She was punched, hit, knocked to the ground, and then her head was stomped upon. Same day, Probably the most controversial at this time was the Palm Beach County, Florida nurse assault. That was at Palm West Hospital. The nurse was attacked by what they call a Baker Act patient, and we'll get to that in a little bit. She was beaten so severely that she was unconscious. She required mechanical ventilation. She had subdural subarachnoid bleeding and multiple facial bones broken in her face. And then finally on February 22nd, probably the most horrific in my mind, just because of the setting and the nature of the crime. It was in Shiloh, Pennsylvania at UPMC Memorial Hospital. A male entered the building, walked directly to the ICU with zip ties, duct tape, and a firearm. Zip tied several ICU nurses, staff, shot a physician, a nurse, and a custodian is how it's been portrayed in the news, and then also shot a police officer.
And
so
killed the police officer, I believe.
Yeah, those are the 4 cases that have hit mainstream just in the last, week or so. I mean, if you look at some articles, there are some of these workplace healthcare violent acts that span back for years and years. There's another one in July of 2023, shooting in Portland, Oregon, where of all places in a labor and delivery setting, an individual went to go see his significant other's newborn and apparently ended up angry at staff, was threatening them. Police were called and he began shooting. There was 1 dead and 1 injured at that facility. It was called Legacy Good Samaritan Medical Center. Another was in Tulsa, Oklahoma in June of 2022. A man had back surgery, went to an outpatient orthopedic office, was unhappy with his care, went out, bought a firearm, and returned and shot and killed a receptionist and 2 physicians, and then a gentleman who was shielding his wife and killed them. So this is something that, if you look at the locations, they're just various places. Some of them are close to home. These things are things that could happen in any one of the settings that I work in. So it strikes a nerve, and it's something that we, I think, as healthcare providers need better training, better tools, and it's worth a discussion for sure.
So what do you think the cause of it is? Is it something that is inherently going bad with society in general, or is it just something that is being reported more now and we're becoming more aware of it?
I honestly think it's twofold, right? I think that probably it's reported more frequently now. I think that also people have maybe some unrealistic expectations of healthcare providers. I think that maybe for those that are grieving, we're not providing tools for them. I think that there's a lack of mental health for people. We all know that. I think that it's multifactorial, and I wish I had those answers. I just think that as a healthcare provider, being at the bedside or in a clinic or wherever it is, wherever the setting is, being able to identify that there's an issue and being able to then either de-escalate or figure out what my next steps are is probably what's going to help most. Because I'm not always going to be able to be like, oh, dude's got a gun, he's going to come in here and shoot me, right? But if I can look at somebody and be like, oh gosh, they've got crazy eyes and they're walking in here pretty aggressive, and I hear them talking to that individual and it doesn't sound so good. I mean, if I can maybe get the appropriate people to help sooner than later, I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm gonna get on kind of a soapbox because I mean, it's no secret that I have a full-time job on top of all this, and I don't work in public safety anymore. But I did just have a conversation with a group of, we'll call them coworkers, I guess. And we do, every week, I send out an email to them, and we talk, I call it a safety moment, and we discuss real world situations that have occurred. I've shared some real world stories that I've been involved in with them, and in hopes that it'll help them kind of open their eyes a little bit more and realize that is not that friendly of a place. However, there are things that you can do to set yourself up for better success. And I think one of the things, this isn't a bash on healthcare. This isn't a bash on any particular hospital, doctor's office, bank, anything like that. But I think we all tend to, when we do the same job every single day, we've got a routine, right? Wake up, maybe we make our coffee, take a shower, get ready for the workday, whatever, drive to work, listen to the same show in the morning, or radio, podcast, whatever, go into work, clock in, and whatever goes on from there. And I think we, as humans, we start to get to the point where we are repeating the same thing over again, right? Because we like to have some kind of formal plan. I mean, we're human. Like, we like to do, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't want there to be really any surprises. Yes, we want a routine. But the problem with having the same routine all the time is we're not necessarily paying attention to our surroundings. And I think one of the biggest things that anybody can do, regardless of what industry you're in, regardless of what it is you do for a living, is you kind of have to break that routine up a little bit, and you have to just stop and take a look at your surroundings. And this drives Beth nuts, but every time if we go out to eat, I always have to sit facing the main entrance.
It drives me nuts because I want to sit that way.
So
I know where the exits are and all of that.
Yeah, I know where the exits are. I know where the kitchen is in case I need to go into the kitchen for an emergency for any reason. I know.
You always have an escape plan.
Yeah, I know just about everything that's going on inside that building. If I have to flip a table over, I know I can flip a table over, whatever the case may be. But I always have a plan in my head. And I do the same thing when I'm at work. Yep, I do the same thing when I'm at work. I do the same thing when the family and I are just out, maybe we're going to the store or the movie theater, whatever. I always have a plan. And I think a lot of people kind of forget to do that. And at some point, we're going to have an individual on this show. Him and I talked a while back. Cody, you know him. You've worked with him before. But at some point, we're going to have him on the show. And he's really good about having a plan in place and really good about preparing for future events and stuff like that. But the point I'm trying to make is everybody needs to have a plan, no matter how. It doesn't have to be anything major. You don't have to prepare for an apocalypse type situation to occur, but you need to have a plan of what you're going to do to keep yourself safe, maybe your family safe, and maybe those that you're tasked with caring for safe. But you got to have some kind of plan in place. Daddy. And I feel like a lot of these situations, we're running into that. We're not having a plan.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? Like, you talk about complacency. That's what it is. You go to work, and in this blog I wrote, nurses have historically not thought about walking into work and potentially being shot or beaten. Nurses have historically not questioned his or her safety from violence. I mentioned that my husband worked our city EMS system for many years. He would don a ballistic vest prior to putting on his white button-up uniform shirt. We knew that he could be involved in an at-risk situation. It was never questioned when I put on my scrubs and my tennis shoes and went to work that I would potentially end up in a situation where I was being threatened. Over the last 22 years, I can't tell you that I haven't been hit, kicked, punched, bitten, berated. All of those things have happened to me. And I guess historically, I've never reported it. I've always put it off on they're intoxicated, or they're just, in some sort of psychosis, or they're delirious, or they're, demented, or the multitude of things that we see. And I have never really felt as though I have been threatened until recently. There was a situation, and it really, really struck a nerve. And I think now that all of this is unfolding on national news, that nerve is just really raw for me, to the point where I feel like I need to do something. And I am not a big political kind of person. I'm let's change things at the elbow. Let me see what I can do at my level. What can I do for my coworkers, and what can I do in my situation and in my environment? And so I'm hoping that this will lead to discussions with some of my coworkers and maybe even the administrators to embark upon something.
And I'm gonna piggyback that. I'm gonna piggyback that. And I try not to. One, this show is not a political show. I don't get into politics. I could really care less who you voted for. My big thing is we all just need to come together and support one another and stop the divide. But I am gonna say that I think another thing that is causing some of this, we talked about the lack of mental health availability across the country and how that is turning into a bigger issue. But I think another issue is people across the country are losing their minds when it comes to healthcare, and they're not sure what to believe anymore because it's the same thing with politics. Like nobody knows who to believe in the federal, whoever, regardless of who's in office. But I think since COVID, a lot of people since more and more information has been coming out as of late, I think people are worried and don't know if they should be believing what they're being fed. They don't know if they should trust what the doctor is saying. They don't know if they should trust what, the nurses are doing. And again, I'm not saying that gives them a right to act the way they're acting, because by no means is that the case. But I think that's also been playing a factor, is people just don't know what to believe anymore. And for some, that has made them go absolutely crazy.
So to go along with that, Beth, have you noticed an increase in violence or reported violence towards healthcare workers since, we'll go with the year 2020?
I don't know that I have personally seen some sort of change that I've been like, oh, there's more workplace violence. I will tell you that in the reading that I've done, there are articles that cite that since COVID or since 2019, 2020, healthcare providers, as Tyler just said, maybe there's not as much trust. We've asked them to vaccinate. We've asked them to wear a mask. We've asked them to do this. We've asked them to do that. And some people really were bent by that. Like they did not want to participate in those types of things. There's an article in a bulletin that the American College of Surgeons put out, and they definitely refer to the pandemic. And they mention that, people have a more negative attitude towards healthcare providers. So, personally, can I say that I have seen that? I mean, historically, I have, because of the patient population that I work with, I've always seen some like discontent and because we're dealing with folks who, obviously are in a terrible grief process because of the acuity of the injuries that people sustain, or they are dying. I've seen some really terrible things over the years. So I personally don't know that I have seen an increase, but it's definitely published. If that answers your question.
So there's two things that I want to add. One, in case anybody is like rolling their eyes or shaking their head at my comment of people not trusting the healthcare system, let's just look at measles, for example. We had a vaccine for measles. We have a vaccine for measles. We have completely at one point eradicated measles entirely. Thus far, according to the Center of Disease Control, we have had 164 cases in 2025, and it's only March 1st. 164 cases.
Was it the first death from measles in a decade? Is that right?
I think, yeah, I believe so. The other thing too is last year we had 285 cases all year last year. So we're already on track to passing that. And then not to mention the highest total cases. Yeah, that doesn't even make sense. Then it says which was the highest total since 74 in 2019. So apparently in 2019 we had 1,274 cases. But regardless, measles was completely eradicated, and people aren't wanting to vaccinate their kids anymore, which I think is absolutely insane. We have scientific proof showing that those vaccines that we've given to our kids have been helping. Again, I'm not getting on the debate of is it causing autism? Is it causing all this other crap? Because I'm just not going down that road. But those vaccines have caused those diseases to pretty much go away. And now people aren't wanting to do that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was, it's interesting that if we are seeing an increase in reports of healthcare providers or EMS personnel or firefighters or whatever of reporting abuse, this is pretty serious because Cody and I can both attest to this. I could tell you a handful of times, probably more than a handful, honestly, that I've been punched, kicked, attacked, whatever, by a patient, whether they were drunk on drugs, demented, it doesn't matter, whatever they had going on. I've been attacked several times. If I was to report every single one of those incidents, I mean, half the population in my city would be gone because it happens so often. So if healthcare workers and medics and EMTs and firefighters are starting to report these, it's getting more severe. It's becoming more common, and it's a huge issue.
I have a few statistics.
On the public safety side of things, though, to a certain extent, it shouldn't be, but it is expected to a certain extent. And I don't think in the healthcare setting, Beth, I don't think you go into work expecting that, somebody's going to attack you or there's a potential for that. Me working in fire and EMS, it could happen my next run, right? It's expected. It's something that, you do train for, but it's expected. Whereas you on your line of work, it's just not something that even I would think of when I walk into work.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, again, sending my husband off to work for the city EMS system, there was always that thought in the back of my mind. He could end up in some sort of situation. I don't typically go to work thinking somebody could walk in with a firearm and tie me up with duct tape and zip ties. I just don't think that way. Have we thought about it more recently? Yeah, because of the news and the things that have been coming across on the news. There are some statistics from a couple of different articles. Workplace violence is 5 times more likely to occur in the hospital than any other setting. That was in a JAMA article. 20% of hospital workers have experienced workplace violence, and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that 73% of non-fatal injuries that occur in the workplace are secondary to violence in the healthcare setting. That's pretty significant. And then you had asked about the increase in reporting. They also mentioned that from March 2021 to March 2022, there was an increase in reporting by 119% by nursing.
And that's still underreported as far as the violence
100%.
against healthcare workers go.
And that was literally the next thing I was going to say. This could be up to 3 times higher secondary to underreporting. So
I think the other thing too to consider is, I'm not going to name the hospital, but there's actually 2 local hospitals in this area that take in the vast majority of patients that are on a 24-hour hold. And we'll come back to explaining 24 and 72 and all that stuff later, but on a CIT. And that particular hospital, I worked security at when I was fresh out of 1 year of college at the time. And it was not uncommon for us to get in an altercation with a patient started by the patient. Like it just wasn't uncommon because we're getting people that, again, as I mentioned before, they're on some sort of drug or they're severely intoxicated or there's a mental health issue and now they've got like excited delirium and they've got all these different issues going on where they are just ready to go. And I think in settings like that, those may not go reported as much as they would at like another hospital that doesn't see those kinds of patients very often. Would you agree?
I don't know that I have no idea. I don't know what they report. I can't really speak to that. I would have imagined that they would be reported. I do know that in reading, there was mention that even like security and our police for different facilities underreport. So, I mean, I guess what you're saying makes complete sense, right? Like things like that pop off, and then you just chalk it up to, oh, well, that's that patient. You don't necessarily report what has occurred or whatnot. And that is one of the things that with the initiative of the Joint Commission and their driving key points, I guess, for a lack of better words, reporting and documentation is huge for them. So I guess I never really even thought about that being underreported or not reported, because again, you just chalk it up to, oh, well, that's that patient. They're intoxicated. They're already detained. Or, that he's in acute psychosis, and I'm not going to write this down because they're already detained.
Well, I guess there's an aspect of it too, where you're going into work. It's something that occurs, like for Tyler, when he was working security on a daily basis. It's just at that point it becomes part of the job, as opposed to some of the outlying facilities or some of the smaller facilities that don't take those patients. If it occurs, well, that doesn't occur every day. So that's a big event at that point.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. So kind of on that same track. So there's two different things that go on when you've got, well, let's talk about a CIT. Granted, this is probably, this may just be Indiana. I can't say if any other state does this the same way, but you've got, let's say somebody calls in a well-being check on a family member or whatever. We'll say well-being check, and police go out and they find out that this patient meets criteria for a 24-hour hold, is what we call it. So a 24-hour hold is the minimum amount of time that we can hold a patient to be evaluated by a mental health expert. So within that, I think I had that backwards. 24-hour hold is the maximum amount of time. 24 hours is the maximum amount of time that we can hold a patient. During that time, that patient has to be seen by a mental health expert. And that person has to determine a lot of different factors, but for the sake of dumbing this down for everybody, they have to determine if that person is a danger to themselves, a danger to other people, or both, right? Or none at all. They have to determine that. If they determine those things, a lot of times they like to give that patient the opportunity to make the decision themselves to go and seek help at a mental health care facility. What happens more often than not is the patient doesn't want to do that. They want to go back home, which I totally get. I would want to do the same thing. So then they have to bring in the courts involved in this. And that's when we start looking at a 72-hour detention, which the 72 hours is the minimum amount of time that somebody would have to stay inside a facility seeking treatment until a doctor can say, yep, I think this patient's good to go. They can be released. But that amount of time can always be increased. But in order to get that 72-hour detention, a judge has to sign off saying, yes, I think you meet the criteria for this patient. We need to hold them against their will and put them into a mental health facility.
So,
in a nutshell, that's pretty much how it goes. What else do you have to add there, Beth?
Yeah, so in Indiana, it's legal code 5150. And that allows for an involuntary hold for up to 72 hours. It's also known as an emergency detention. That's something that I can request from a judge based on an individual coming in, whether they're suicidal or threat to themselves or others. Maybe they've made a suicide attempt and now I have them in the hospital providing their acute medical care or the multitude of other things that occurs. They have to be deemed mentally ill. They have to be dangerous to oneself or others, or gravely disabled, or unable to care for just basic needs. Those are the things that I can go to the court and say, hey, this is Beth Burns. I need help in detaining this patient. I don't think that they're safe. With that being said, I can keep them in the acute care setting while I'm managing their medical needs. In fact, majority of psychiatric facilities don't provide acute medical care. And so the medical needs have to be met before they can move on to the local psychiatric care in this area. In regards to the Baker Act that we had mentioned for that incident that occurred in Florida, and this is going to come into conversation here in a moment. The Baker Act is specific to Florida. It is an act that came about in 1972 by a representative, I believe her name was Maxine Baker. This is very similar. It was a 72 involuntary kind of detention for essentially the same criteria. Kentucky and Ohio have similar laws. It's called the Casey Law. And so, indeed, I think that, we have all of these sort of laws that help detain patients, but then we have an issue once we get these people into an acute care setting that's not solely psychiatric trained professionals, aka a psychiatric hospital. You are intermingling these patients that have psychiatric issues and may have medical issues too, but you're introducing them to people that maybe don't have training to de-escalate some of the behaviors that we're seeing. And here I think we start to see the sequela of events in this workplace violence.
Yeah, some of the stuff that I was looking at before we got on here, as far as training in education and ways to kind of prevent some of that violence. De-escalation techniques were a big one that I came across. Try to diffuse some of those tense situations that could potentially lead to the physical violence, and take care of it before it even happens, maybe. I've never myself participated in any type of de-escalation training. It would probably be good for me, for anybody in public safety or healthcare, honestly, to be some type of a mandatory training to add on to the many, many, many mandatory trainings we already do. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting.
I think in the meantime, before something becomes more, I guess, mandatory for healthcare agencies and public safety and all that, as far as de-escalation techniques, there's a lot of things that pretty common sense on how to handle a situation when somebody is starting to become hostile or violent. Once the fists start throwing, or once weapons are grabbed or something like that, your chances of being able to de-escalate kind of slim down, but it's not,
Absolutely.
but it's not impossible, right? So the biggest thing is, from the training that I have received in the past, as far as de-escalation, mind you, I worked in a prison, I worked security at a hospital, worked in EMS and fire. So I've received some, but the biggest things are, letting the patient or the individual, even if you're not at work, you're just outside on the street, letting them know that you hear that they are upset. You hear what they are saying. Maybe you start repeating back to them what they're saying. You're not doing it in a mocking way. You're not doing it trying to make fun of them. You're just letting them know, I hear that you're frustrated. So for example, Cody, let's say you're mad because I took your energy drink. Well, I'm going to say, you know what? I hear that you're upset that I took your energy drink. I'm sorry. What can I do to help that? You're not trying to, I guess, take fault in a situation per se. And you're not trying to show yourself that you're weak, because a lot of people look at that too. I was a kid, young and stupid at one point, and I looked at de-escalation as, I'm weak. That means I don't want to take the situation out. But at the end of the day, it's not just about you. It's about everybody that's around you. So if you can have that conversation with that individual, let them know that you understand they're upset, and do what you can to try to bring down the tension between the two of you. That helps tremendously. I mean, I don't know the exact statistics, but I'm sure that's probably going to decrease the chances of something severe by at least 50%.
So it's interesting because you could speak verbatim for the Joint Commission, because part of their de-escalation plan is approaching the individual with a calm demeanor, active listening, open-ended questions, empathy, and distraction. And I can tell you, in the situation that I spoke of at the very beginning, I spent a very long time with this individual, and I did a lot of de-escalation, and this is exactly what I did. I sat with him. I spoke to him. I treated him like a human being, keeping in mind that my exit strategy was noted. I set boundaries, very clear and distinct boundaries. When he would start to escalate, I would then again de-escalate. And he knew that I had those boundaries. So I think that, it's nice that there are all these things that Joint Commission has established, but I haven't seen them as a healthcare provider. We do these computer-based learnings every year because we have to on active shooter and workplace violence. And I can tell you that, we probably all rush through them just to get them done. And I don't know. And how much are you actually learning from a computer-based learning module? Like, why aren't we doing some active scenarios? Why aren't we doing some things that are real life? Because that's how I learn best. And I think that that's how most humans learn best, is by trial and error and by kind of case and scenario.
There's some simple things that you can practice regardless of where you're at. Doesn't matter if you're at work, doesn't matter if you're at a restaurant, doesn't matter where you're at. Simple things. One, don't ever put yourself in a situation when you're in a corner. If you don't have a way of getting around somebody to get to an exit, you're in a bad spot. So you need to try to move yourself so that at least the exit is behind you, or there's a clear path. I think the other best thing to do is, like we talked about a few minutes ago, is when you're having a conversation with somebody, letting them know that you're listening, you understand what they're upset about, but your body language also plays a huge role, right? If you're standing there, I know a lot of us, myself included, I find myself standing, talking to somebody or listening to somebody talk, and my arms are crossed. Well, my arms being crossed could be giving somebody vibes that I don't care about what it is they have to say, or I think they're full of BS, or whatever the case may be. So having your arms down, in front of you, on your side, whatever, but you want to keep your hands visible too, right? If we have somebody who's, potentially going to get violent or whatever, we want them to know that, hey, I'm not a threat. I got my hands up in the air. You can see there's nothing in my hands. I have no intentions of coming at you. Keep a safe distance from people. That's another big thing you can do. Just, these are things that you can practice wherever you're at. It doesn't have to be, a computer-based training. And Beth, I 100% agree with you. I can't tell you how many times I've done computer-based trainings over my lifetime. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm seeing if I could slide that little video bar to make it go a little bit quicker so I don't have to watch it, and then take the final test and be done.
Yeah. Tyler, you had mentioned you kind of suspect that de-escalation techniques could reduce injuries or incidents by like 50%. I think it's the number you threw out there. Just real quick, Google search. And this is related to police departments, not necessarily healthcare, but police departments that have instituted de-escalation training and de-escalation techniques and focused highly on them. Reduction in workplace injuries due to violent encounters by 25 to 40%, depending on the department.
That's significant.
It is.
So I think one of the other things that needs to be mentioned when we're talking about statistics, before we kind of move on, and maybe we could talk about some of those incidences that have happened in the last week. So this has had a huge and very direct impact on healthcare. Obviously, workplace violence increases stress, burnout, job dissatisfaction. It was noted by the National Nurses United that 6 in 10 nurses either change jobs or completely leave the career. And so if you think about that, that's that's 40% of the nursing workforce, right, that they've surveyed, that they're going to altogether leave. Like, what happens to the patients that need to be taken care of? Wait, that's right. We're short-staffed, which causes more stress and more burnout. And it's such a terrible, slippery slope to be on. There is also mentioned that there's a study out of Turkey, and it was huge. It was greater than 10,000 healthcare workers about workplace violence. 60.2% showed at least one post-traumatic symptom after their incidents of workplace violence, and 30% of those individuals considered quitting their career altogether. Again, that's significant. When we start bleeding staff from places because either they're scared to go to work or they're overwhelmed by their job or they're just done with it, like, what do we do? Who's going to take care of my mom? Who's going to take care of my husband? Who's going to take care of whoever the individual might be at the bedside?
Makes it already a career that's already in short supply even more short supplied and short staffed.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw this out there because I've seen a lot of videos surfacing the internet of nurses calling for metal detectors at every hospital and, calling for all these different safety measures. But I'm here to tell you, those metal detectors are only going to work so well. One, yeah, they may keep somebody from bringing something in, but technology is advancing every single day where people are being able to make stuff that aren't detected by metal detectors. So that's only going to get you so far. The other issue is a lot of these situations where these nurses and doctors and whoever else are being attacked, they're not being attacked by things that were brought in from the patient or the visitor from the outside, minus the exception of the situation in Pennsylvania. They're being attacked with things that they're finding inside the hospital. I mean, scissors.
Fists, their fists, their feet.
Those are deadly weapons.
So metal detectors aren't going to stop that. So I don't think that's the answer. What I think is the answer is, go ahead.
I will tell you, in the American College of Surgeons, the bulletin that I mentioned earlier, they mentioned UC San Diego, huge trauma center in our nation. They see 45,000 emergency department visits per year. 8 weeks prior to their metal detectors being instituted, 511 patients were screened and 15 weapons were confiscated. 8 weeks post detectors, 13,149 people were screened and they confiscated 194 weapons. First and foremost, they mentioned 511 patients were screened and they found a couple handfuls of weapons, right? Like, why were they just checking patients, right? And secondly, they instituted these metal detectors. Then they started screening everybody. People is how they mentioned it. Now they're screening everyone that comes in and out of their emergency department, out of their hospital. What is that? And the other thing is, in all of the research I've done, is people have these metal detectors, but they are not staffed appropriately. So you can have them there all day long, but if you don't have the staff to manage said metal detectors and or screening individuals coming in and out, well, good is it, right? You can have it there, but if you don't have the staff to take care of them, and if you're not having them at every door, like, in the facility that I work in, there are metal detectors at the emergency room doors. However, there are not anywhere else.
And there's 500 million doors in that place.
Correct.
Oh, yeah. So my question is again, what is their definition of a weapon? Because, I mean, keys are weapons. This pen could be a weapon. So I get it. It's probably not near as elaborate as I'm trying to make it sound, but I doubt that they're finding 10% of the people that they screened are carrying AR-15s with them as they're coming to the hospital. So I think going back to what I was saying, we can put these metal detectors in, but you're maybe only going to find 10% of people carrying quote unquote weapons. At the end of the day, what's really going to save your staff and what's really going to help explain to your staff that, yes, we care about you and yes, we care about your well-being and we want to protect you is by training them better. Don't make them go out and seek their own training, which we'll talk about options, at least in Northeast Indiana area. Some of these which are options across the country, but we'll talk about that later. But, don't make the staff go and seek their own self-defense training or something like that. Provide them with something that's going to be beneficial. And I know what everybody's going to say already is, well, we don't want to teach the nurses or the doctors how to hurt people. I'm sorry. If somebody's trying to attack me, and I know that's a response because I've heard that response before when I worked in the field. If somebody's trying to attack me or somebody else, I don't care if they get hurt, because at the end of the day, I'm going home, and I'm going home in one piece, or my wife is going home in one piece, or my best friend, whatever. We're all going home at the end of the day. If somebody is trying to attack us, I'm going to do whatever it is that I have to do to protect myself and everybody else. And if that means that, well, maybe they've got a few fingers that are broken or whatever the case may be, I mean, it sucks. At least they're in the right place, right? At least they're at a hospital. They can get that taken care of. Like, the mentality has to change. That's the big problem. The mentality has to change from the top down. Like, people need to understand that if you want to see a decline in this crap that's going on, you need to better prepare your staff across the board. I don't care if they are in janitorial. I don't care if they're a tech or security or trauma surgeon. You need to train your people how to protect themselves and how to be able to protect others. Teach them, do active shooter scenarios. Teach them to run, hide, fight. Teach them how to do close quarter combat, quote unquote, but how to protect themselves in a close situation. Teach them the tools that they need.
And I don't know anybody or about anybody else necessarily, but some of those computer-based learning for active shooter and workplace violence and all of that stuff, a lot of that's 5 or 6 slides. Here's your test.
You know,
what does
I
that
don't
teach
think
anybody?
Right. I don't think that I would have as much knowledge that I have in regards to active shooter if I wouldn't have brought in some of the rescue task force training to the county EMS systems. And that's been 6 years ago. But with that being said, like, I wouldn't have that knowledge if I wasn't part of the community EMS system at that time. So I feel like that's something that maybe we lose translation of inside the hospital for sure.
I think the other problem too is the reason why there are only 5 or 6 slides is because a lot of places don't want to tell people, going back on my rant, a lot of people don't want to tell people, learn how to fight for yourself, learn how to protect yourself, because that's not the correct answer to a lot of these organizations and companies. Again, not singling out one particular organization or one particular company or anything like that. That's just the way it's been historically across the country. Is we don't want to teach people how to protect themselves. We want to tell people that if you're in this situation, you need to run or hide, which is fine and great. And really, those should be your first options, because that's the best chance of survival and that's the best chance of getting out without injuries. But that's not always the likely scenario. Like, there's going to be times where you're going to have to fight. And at that point, if you're in a situation where you have to fight and protect yourself, the gloves are off. Anything you could possibly get your hands on to protect yourself, if you're in a life or death situation, it's game on.
Yeah, hugs and good vibes don't fix everything.
But again, it comes back to de-escalation. If we can start with de-escalation and work our way down that track, that's the best option to go. But that's not always the situation.
Absolutely. I'm not saying, places of employment need to send their workers out to, do jujitsu training and all that, but at minimum, verbal de-escalation techniques.
At least to start with, yeah.
So before we move into these cases, just for fun, I Googled how to stay safe as a nurse. Because I'm a nurse, I'll always be a nurse. You? Google told me hand hygiene, wear proper PPE, safe patient handling to avoid injury,
washing hands fixes everything.
Yes, sharp safety, and drug administration safety, because I don't want to get that nitro paste on my hands. So
nothing about workplace violence.
So sad that we are so naive as an entire workforce. We historically, as we said at the beginning, we go to work and we don't think about not being safe, right? Like, we think about going to work and taking care of people and putting our heart and our soul into it, because that's what we do. So to think about, I might have to understand where the exit route is. I might have to understand that this person's they're a little volatile, and I might have to protect myself, or I might have to back out of this room quicker than I think.
Google did add on here workplace violence. However, it's the last thing at the very bottom of the AI overview, and it specifically says, report instances of workplace violence and promote the appointment of a safety officer or occupational health nurse. What?
Protect yourself by reporting it.
Yeah. Which, you know what? Completely agree. We should be reporting. However,
well, yes, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where, you know, in healthcare and in public safety, we really don't report this stuff as often as we should. Yes, there's an increase. So yes, that is an issue, but we can't be taking baby steps with this crap. Like, we need to be teaching people how to protect themselves.
For sure. Do you want to move into some cases?
Yes, because
Okay.
I'm angry.
So I'm going to go and talk. I'm going to talk about the two that are probably the least controversial first, because I think that we'll probably spend some time on two of them. So first and foremost, we'll talk about February 17th, Chicago, Illinois, Provident Hospital. A physician and a PA were providing care for an individual in the hospital. It sounds like whatever sharp object this person had, he brought it in because he pulled it from pockets, is what I've been reading in news articles. I could be completely wrong on that, but that's what it sounded like. They stabbed the physician in the chest.
Visitor?
It was a patient. So he stabbed the emergency department physician in the chest, stabbed the PA. This is a 28,000 ED visit per year facility. They're short-term acute care, which means they hold folks for shorter duration. They only have 79 med-surg beds. They have 6 ICU beds and 11 short stay beds. So they're a smaller facility in Chicago. Both of these healthcare providers were transported from that facility to the Level 1 Trauma Center, UCMC. I feel like for this specific situation, my question, he was detained immediately by, whether it was police, security, whatever it was, the hospital folks that were there in whatever capacity, they detained him immediately. It was very short-lived. My only question would be, if this was on his person when he came in the hospital, could they have found this object on metal detection? That would be my question for this case.
Do we have an update on how the PA and the doctor are doing?
They both had non-life-threatening injuries and were discharged.
So was this a patient that came into the ER, or were they brought in by EMS?
Do not know.
Does it mention? Okay.
It doesn't specify. And I got this from Fox 32 out of Chicago. And they didn't have like super exciting details. It was pretty, it lacked details, if you will.
Yeah, so I think I kind of know where Cody was going with this question. In a perfect world, I would say, as EMS providers, we should be having patients put their belongings into bags so that we could limit this kind of stuff, but that's not always ideal. Cody, just as well as I do, there are people that we have transported to the hospital that have 8-10 bags of belongings that they're taking with them because they plan on moving in for the next month and a half. But regardless, in that case, yes, maybe metal detectors would have been. I don't know, because if that's the case, if that patient was brought in by EMS, you're going to roll a cot through the ER and send them through a metal detector. That's going to go off all the time.
Again, I don't...
for EMS patients, that's just not really something that I think you're going to actually be able to implement, coming through the ambulance entrance, because
right.
we're going to set it off walking through the doors just with what we carry in our pockets. I was just curious whether it was EMS brought the patient in or walked through the door. Because me personally, just through the assessing a patient, I've pulled weapons off of patients that I've found.
We've pulled firearms off of trauma patients that theoretically, they should have been.
I've missed a lot of stuff too, so I'm not perfect.
And it's easy to do. No fault. It's easy to do. You're trying to manage the situation in the back of a truck in a very short span of time. Like, believe me, zero criticism there. By no means would I criticize EMS professionals.
I've had actually, it was a family member of a patient that got brought into one of the local hospitals. They were there as a result of being shot. The family member, I mean, this particular hospital, they have armed officers on campus. He saw one of these officers, pulled his gun out of his pants, handed it to me, and said, "I gotta go." And then I'm sitting there with a gun in my hand, and hey guys.
Nice.
Who wants this?
Excuse me. So, I mean, I don't know that I have a whole lot of criticism or whether it's positive or negative regarding this case. I think it's a situation that I could be in every single day with my trauma surgeon. It is something that could happen to me at any moment in my job. I could walk in to do a surgical consult or a trauma consult, and this could happen to me. Without a doubt.
I don't know that they're, this is called the debrief, not the armchair quarterback, but I don't know that there is anything that they could have done differently. I also wasn't there. I don't know the situation, but at the end of the day, it just kind of goes back to what we said a little while ago. Like, what situational awareness, would that have helped? Was this patient agitated when they arrived on scene? We don't know. Or when they arrived on site? We don't know.
Right.
But if they were, de-escalation techniques could have helped. There's just so many different variables that have happened with this situation. I'm glad that it sounds like the PA and the doctor are doing well as best as we know. But yeah, just a crappy situation.
So the second one was on February 18th in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. This was at Jenny Stewart Health. It's a 194-bed acute care hospital that sees 35,000 ED visits per year. A 25-year-old female patient in the emergency department attacked a nurse when she was being checked out. Apparently, she didn't like her care that she was provided. He punched her in her head repeatedly until she went to the ground, and then the woman began stomping on her head. Other nurses detained the woman and moved her actually to a separate room until what I read was that police got there. So my question, kudos to the other nurses, right? Because I think about this all the time. I think, would I run? Would I fight? Would my coworkers fight for me? What would happen if this was me on the ground and somebody was stomping on my head? Would somebody be there to pull them off and detain them in another room? So kudos to those nurses for their bravery, and we'll use bravery for them because that's brave.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely brave. Did they have security in this emergency department? Did they have police? I get they had to call police, but I kind of wonder what was happening. Was this woman almost out the door? Was she being walked to her vehicle, and being sent away in her car? Oftentimes nursing staff will walk individuals out to their vehicles upon discharge. I don't know the details of that, but those are my questions. Where was the rest of the staff? Where was security?
Yeah, so I'll agree. Kudos to those other nurses that stepped in. You don't really see a whole lot of that anymore in the world. We see more people pulling out cell phones to get a recording than we do people jumping in to help. So kudos to them for that.
Not wanting to get involved themselves
in
general.
Right. So kudos to them for doing that. I think, and this is probably poor timing to bring this up, but this is not directed at this nurse. This is not directed at any of these situations. But one of the things I thought of is, there are times, Cody and I have had this conversation, I think on the last episode, how you treat people and how you talk to people plays a big role in the reaction you're going to get out of people. If you feel like, for example, you've got a patient who has probably no business being in the ER, right? There's really nothing wrong with them. There's really nothing going on. You've done all of your due diligence. You did testing and scans and all this other stuff, and you've helped them in every way you can. there are times where some individuals are having a bad day and they maybe aren't treating them with the greatest respect. Again, this is not directed by any means at this situation. I just think it's important that this is said. How you say things and how you react to somebody plays a huge role in, again, de-escalation, keeping things calm, not letting it get out of control. We have to show people respect. Like, that's the mentality in the world right now, is respect is earned, not given. And it really shouldn't be the case. Like, we should be respecting everybody as human beings and just trying to treat people as such.
Yeah, and the first person that interacts with that patient also kind of sets the tone for
100%.
the rest of it.
100%.
And
Yes.
kind of even throw EMS in there as well. How that EMS crew treated that patient and interacted with that patient sets a big tone for sometimes how that patient actually behaves in the ER and towards the staff in the ER.
Let's take it
Completely agree.
Let's take it a step before that. How they're treated when they call 911. How dispatch is treating them over the phone. Are they treating them, with like a monotone type conversation like we should be? Because, I mean, again, like, we shouldn't necessarily be showing reaction with our voice when we're on the call with somebody. We shouldn't be acting like, this is Jane Smith again calling to, she's lonely and she wants somebody to come take her out, or Joe Dirt or whatever. Like, we want to make sure, even from that initial call, that we're treating people with respect while we're on the call as well.
I think I completely agree. I think that, tone is everything, right? Somebody who comes at me with a poor tone, I'm not going to take nicely to. I think that's human nature, right? Like, we all become defensive when we feel like people are offending us or are not spending enough time on whatever our concern is. So I think that is human nature. And I think that it's definitely something that aggravates people, irritates people, and can definitely escalate behaviors. And so this definitely might have been part of this scenario. And I will tell you that in reading, a lot of the underreporting is because places are coming back to people saying, well, your tone wasn't that great, or this was not that great, or your performance really isn't that great. And so I think that, yes, we need to be cognizant of ourselves and how we're treating others. And I think that does translate to this in many ways. So
yeah, I mean, it's no different in any other.
It does not excuse the violence.
100%. But I think you hit the nail on the head. And it doesn't matter what field it is. People don't necessarily want to report things because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble.
That's
also
going to be punitive.
for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Right. And
it should be non-punitive in reality.
100%.
Agreed. And the reason why people respond like that is because chances are they have gotten in trouble, or they know somebody that's gotten in trouble for reporting a concern in the past. Again, in my current job, I got people that they don't necessarily want to report near misses, or they don't want to report injuries, because during the investigation, somebody's going to find out that they weren't wearing safety shoes, or they weren't wearing safety glasses, or whatever. And now they feel like they're going to get in trouble, when in all reality, it's really the case. Like, yeah, you're going to get a talking to, and conversation's going to be had about why it's important to wear proper PPE. But at the end of the day, we're just concerned about your injury. We're concerned about your safety.
So the next, I want to skip over the second one that was on February 18th, I think, because it will blossom. Did you like that word? More conversation.
I like how you're looking right at me when you say that too. It's like she knows me.
So the next one I want to talk about is on February 22nd in Shiloh, Pennsylvania at UPMC Memorial Hospital. A shooting took place. The situation goes like this. A wife with terminal illness and on life support was in this hospital in the critical care unit. The assailant, the night before the shooting, was removed by security for becoming irate and emotionally overwrought, is what I read on The wife apparently died. She was on hospice care. And on the 22nd, I think it was around 10 a.m. or so, the assailant came back to the hospital, walked through the front doors of said hospital and into the ICU where his wife was previously receiving care. He had zip ties, duct tape, and a firearm. He shot a physician, a nurse, and a custodian. He zip tied and duct taped ICU staff and held them hostage for a period of time. He eventually started moving out of the hospital, shot at 3 officers, fatally killing Officer Andrew Duarte. And I don't know that I said that correctly. Last name is Duarte.
I think it's Duarte, but I could be wrong.
The officers then shot and killed the assailant. This really resonates with me. There was a PA for the pulmonary critical care group that spoke on a news for a news agency, and he was just appalled and in terrible grief. And he mentioned how he had conversations with this man through his wife's hospital stay, and he seemed to be grieving, but he never seemed to be emotionally overwrought, as they said. He mentioned that he never ever imagined that this man would come back and do this. I can't tell you how many times I have sat in a consultation room, which is a very small room, with families, with wives, husbands, parents, aunts, uncles, all the people, and told them that their loved one is not going to live, whether it be through the night or the week or whatever. I have given them the most catastrophic, terrible news of their lives, and I then walk away while they process this grief. And some people don't have a support system to process this grief. And I think this is a terrible situation in which people have died, but this is reality. This can happen. This could happen to me.
I think it's important that everybody, regardless of working in a hospital or if you work on the streets, that everybody takes something away from this situation, because this could just as likely happen out on the street when, how many times have we responded to a 911 call for an unconscious party, and it turns out that, they've been in cardiac arrest for, they died an hour ago and they're not breathing. There's no, we're not going to be doing any resuscitation efforts or anything like that. And how many family members have become irate over that because we're not doing anything to help their family member. I think again, everybody grieves in different ways. And unfortunately, mind you, I'm not a mental health expert. I'm just basing all of this off of my past experience. But I think, everybody grieves in different ways. Everybody handles stress differently. And sometimes it gets to the point where they have zero control over what they say or do. I mean, I can tell you a handful of times where I've had somebody cuss me out on a scene because I couldn't do anything for their family member. And then however many minutes, hours later, they're coming back and they're apologizing for that. People do crazy things when they're upset, and not making that right, wrong, or different. But it's important to keep those things in mind, that it could easily go from 0 to 100 just like that.
And I don't even know how you would go about even preparing yourself or preventing that from happening. Because at that point, when people are in that stage of grief and they're grieving and some switch goes off in their brain or what have you, for lack of a better term, everything I've been reading about this particular subject and the history of the gentleman that did it, no violent criminal history, no mental health problems.
Right.
The quote that you may have already mentioned it, but I was sitting here reading myself, so I didn't really hear a lot of it. I It was the gentleman. I spoke with this very man who did this act, interacting with him multiple days. I truly did not see a monster. He was just simply broken.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that
broken folks at the bedside right now. Like, it happens every single day, right? Because part of life is death, unfortunately. It sounds so terrible, but it's so true. And we all end up grieving at some point in our lives. And it is so unfortunate that there are people that don't have a support system to move through that process.
I think in this particular situation, there's no, okay, so let me start here. So when you review previous cases of active shooter situations in a workplace, let's say in a factory, a lot of people, when they're interviewed after the fact, I'm talking like days or weeks after when they're interviewed for the investigation, a lot of people initially start off saying, you know, there were zero signs. I had no idea this person was going to do X, Y, Z. And these are people that have been working with this person on a daily basis. When in reality, there were several signs of that situation, but just people weren't necessarily aware of what those signs were. In this situation, nobody's working with this guy. I mean, this guy's a visitor of a loved one that is passing away. So you can't say like, oh yeah, one day, you know, Joe Smith was in a great mood and then all of a sudden it just flipped on a dime. But in this situation, it's an active shooter situation. And the best way you can prepare yourself is to know where to go, know where to run, where to hide, and how to defend yourself. And
hide, fight.
So, and
exactly.
That's, so with this particular case, you know, those are the things I think of. He had a handful of people zip tied. What would I do if I was in the back of the unit and he was zip tying people in the front of the unit and that's where he shot people? What would I do in the back of the unit? Would I try and figure out a way to protect and shield everyone else? Would I assign somebody, delegate somebody to call for help so that we could, you know, discuss where this person was at and give some very specific details of what was happening? What would I do? Those are the things that go through my mind. And I really want that to resonate and to be a part of the way that my coworkers think too, you know? And I think that goes back to training, some sort of training. I also, with this case, I would say he walked through the front door. If there would have been metal detectors there, would that have helped? I would imagine, yes.
In that particular situation, probably. I would like to think they would work.
I would like to think that they would be like, oh, you have a gun. Oh, wait, we know you from last night. We kicked you out of here last night. Oh, wait, you have zip ties and duct tape too?
Some alarm bells should be going off at that point.
You know what I mean? Like that. Those are the things that I think of when I and all of this is speculation, right? Because we're getting this from the media and we're not really reviewing any sort of case report or incident report or whatever the case may be. So obviously we're speculating on so many of these details, but.
So I don't want to make it seem like I'm completely 100% against metal detectors because I'm not, but I want you both to think about the last time you went to an event, whether it was a concert, whether it was a hockey game, football game, whatever, and you had to go through a metal detector. How many times did you go through that and you heard that metal detector beeping after one person after another is going through? Or how many times did you come up to that metal detector and they're telling security that's working it is telling you, no, you don't have to empty your pockets. Keep everything in your pockets, because that's become a new thing as of late.
I think I agree with you. I think that there are probably.
There's a point though that I want to make on this. So I'm curious of how many times you guys have seen that.
I mean, we've all seen that, right? Like...
So
I don't go to a lot of those events. So,
well, that's a valid point, Cody.
My metal detectors that I'm used to are the prosecutor's office for stuff I've got subpoenaed for related to work and the airport.
I think it's important, though, that we understand you can have a metal detector at every single doorway, and you can have somebody working a metal detector at every single doorway. But if they aren't properly trained how to use that tool, it's going to do zero good. And I go back to when I was in security and I was given this metal wand and I was told, hey, use this when you have a CIT patient come through. Okay, how do I use it? Oh, we don't know. Just listen for the beep. Well, it beeps all the time. Like, I don't know how this thing works. So if you don't train people on how to use it, like specific data here, the accuracy, handheld metal detectors have a sensitivity of 95.7% for inexperienced investigators and 100% for experienced ones. Okay,
well, that's more along the lines. That's a training deficiency, then, not necessarily the ineffectiveness
correct.
of the metal detectors.
Correct. But my point is, like, if you don't train people how to use the equipment, it doesn't really matter how advanced the technology is that you have it. If they don't know how to use it, then it's not going to do any good.
So, but my point with this specific case is if there was a metal detector, maybe it would have picked up the gun. But the biggest thing it would have done is made that man pause going through the door, where whoever's sitting at that metal detector could have said, oh, that's a dude that was here last night. Whether they would have known that that was the guy that was there last night or not, I'm just saying that maybe it would have caused for pause and they would have identified that that was an aggressive person from the night before. That's my point.
Yeah, I agree. And even having, security presence at a door without a metal detector, having security presence at a door, having police presence, because that's kind of a new thing now where hospitals are starting to have full-time police officers, having that presence there of somebody who has a firearm to match whatever you're bringing in, or having a tool to match whatever you're bringing in, that can also help drastically deter situations like that as well.
Oh, yeah. In that case, deterrence is a big factor in that. What else you got for us, Beth?
Okay, so the last case is probably the most controversial.
The big one. Here we go.
I would say it could happen to anyone. It absolutely could happen to anybody. It was completely unprovoked. This was on February 18th at in Palm Beach County, Florida, at Palm West Hospital. There are 204 acute care bed facility. They have 54,000 patients in the emergency department annually, and a big fraction of those patients in the emergency department are pediatric patients. They have a pediatric specialty. This is from BPBF News 25. A bedside nurse entered a patient's room. This was a Baker patient, a Baker Act patient, as we spoke of before. That's somebody who's on a 72-hour detention in a facility. So he was there for psychiatric reasons. I do not know if he was being treated for anything from a medical standpoint. That's one of my questions for later on. I don't know if he was there for medical and psychiatric needs. Upon entering the room, the patient jumped on top of the nurse and started beating her with his fists and objects, is how it reads. He is up for a second-degree murder charge. I mean, obviously, she did not die, so I think that those charges will be lessened. They also are charging him with a hate crime. I don't know the details of that, and they're being very hush-hush about that. They mentioned it in an article, and then they don't give any details about it. So she was beaten unconscious, as I said before earlier. She ended up intubated. She had a close head injury. And then she had multiple facial fractures. And in the news, it mentioned that she may lose her vision. The hottest topic here is a press release of the 911 call.
Before you get to that, let's discuss the situation first.
Okay. Yeah, so it doesn't say how long the patient was there, but in different news articles, there are reports that he had been there for days and that he was becoming increasingly more volatile and agitated. Again, we don't know if they were treating medical issues.
So from the info that I just pulled up, he was there to seek treatment for an issue not related to his mental health.
So this situation
was updated yesterday.
Okay.
This is an absolute horrific situation. And I think it's important to note that, I feel for the family on this situation. And I know they've done some interviews with the media. I can't imagine what any of them are going through. This is not anything anybody expects to ever happen, whether you're working in a hospital or you're just walking down the street. This is just an absolute horrific situation. With that being said, this individual that did all of this to this nurse, he hands down 100% deserves everything that's coming to him in form of the justice system. It just kind of goes back to what we were talking about. Like, there should have been better things put in place to help protect this nurse and everybody else from this situation occurring. Better, some kind of training for everybody involved. I'm not blaming her by any means. Like, this is not her fault.
Absolutely not.
This is this individual's fault that did all of this. But I think there are a few things that could have happened that should be questioned in the court hearing of what kind of training are you guys providing your staff members to help keep them safe from situations like this in the future? Yeah, and I'll give you a perfect example of why I say that.
Was it reported that did staff report to, higher ups that this was occurring? What steps were taken? What steps weren't taken to potentially protect the staff? Because from what I'm reading, he was acting paranoid for the last 2 days leading up to that attack. So there was warning signs. So what steps were made to protect the staff, if any?
Right. So this poses some questions for me, because this could happen in my setting, right? I could be caring for somebody from a medical standpoint, and they could have some acute psychosis, right? And so first and foremost, he was detained. So he was a Baker Act. So was he receiving psychiatric care along with his medical care there? I don't know. Did he have a history of violence? I would not know that unless by word of mouth someone told me, or I chose to, we call it break the glass. And that means that I would have to get into an old or an existing psychiatric chart within the electronic medical record. We try not to do that, because if I'm only treating the patient for a medical issue and I don't have any maybe reason to do that, then I'm not going to break the glass. Now, if he was having psychosis and things like that, I may break the glass and I may see, like, what are we dealing with? How can I help from a medical standpoint? How can I get psych more involved? Those types of things. But this brings a lot of questions to me as a provider.
So I kind of going back to what I was saying about things that need to be questioned when this does go to court, because it will more than likely go to court just because it's gotten national attention. I have, unfortunately, in my fire and EMS career, have been involved in line of duty death situations. We had a line of duty death in my department back in 2012. Along with that, with my current job, anytime there is a fatality, OSHA, regardless of if you're state or federal, fall under federal OSHA is going to come out and they're going to want to see documentation after documentation. They're going to want to look over everything because they're going to do an investigation on this. But one of those questions that is asked every single time there is a serious injury or there is a fatality is, what are you going to do as an organization to help mitigate this hazard from occurring again? And it doesn't matter if it's fire department, doesn't matter. Unfortunately, I've been involved in 2 fatalities in a workplace. It doesn't matter if, you're at a warehouse setting. They want to know what steps you're going to take, and they want to know now. Because in a fatality, in most cases, OSHA is going to be there within 24 hours. And they're wanting to see all this documentation, and they're going to start doing interviews. So I think the big question comes back to, in all of these situations that we've talked about, what are these places going to do to mitigate this situation? I think we've all come up with the answers of what they should do, but I'm curious to see what they're actually going to do. All right, let's get on to the hot topic of this.
So As you said, I mean, this is a terrible, terrible situation. I would never want to see any one of my coworkers involved in a situation like this, to where now I'm caring for them in a bed. A press release of the hospital administrator's comments to the 911 operator was made, and this has just kind of blown up in social media all over the place.
You said they assaulted the employee until they passed out? Yeah, unconscious. I'm not worried about that part. I mean, the baker I dealt with. And this could be nearly a fatality.
The family took it to an attorney. So the 911 operator says they assaulted the employee until they passed out, ? The hospital administrator replied, yeah, unconscious. I'm not worried about that part. I need the Baker Act dealt with. Then further along in the conversation with the 911 operator, the hospital administrator mentions that it's probably going to be a fatality, and then says she's probably going to die. I think that I probably have a different outlook than many on this because of my background. Because of Tyler's background. First and foremost, when you call 911, many, if not most, of dispatchers that are taking those types of calls are certified. And they have a very scripted kind of dialogue with individuals calling when they're in crisis. So with that being said, this individual, the hospital administrator, mentions that someone is being beaten and is unconscious. Their priority is to find out about said patient, about the victim, so that they can help render the necessary aid, right? So the 911 operator starts asking more questions. The hospital administrator has a completely different mindset. 911 operator wants to send help for said patient. The patient was being cared for already. Remember, they're in a hospital setting. There's an emergency department there, and they see 54,000 patients in the emergency room annually. They're quite competent in taking care of this individual, right? So that part of this crisis is being managed and handled. That's what the hospital administrator is more than likely thinking. The hospital administrator needs to cease the threat to the rest of the hospital and the community, and is stressing to the 911 operator, I need the Baker Act taken care of. And so I understand why many, many people are upset by these very black and white words. They see these words as in such a literal sense that they're missing the rest of the pieces to this puzzle.
It's out of context.
Correct, 100%. And I think at the end, when that hospital administrator says something about, I think she's going to die, I think that was a very realization and a very terrible moment for that individual to think, one of my hospital employees could die from this. And I don't think that there was any malice involved in this. And for anybody to sit back and quarterback and say, you know, I can't believe they said that, they need fired, blah, 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 blah. First and foremost, if you're in healthcare, could you return to your patient assignment and take care of your patients after this occurred? Could you do that? I bet it would be terribly hard. Second, could you maintain the entire hospital? Could you maintain the news? Could you maintain the law enforcement agencies? Could you maintain the family members of the patients in your hospital? Could you maintain the family of the victim? Could you maintain the community? Could you maintain that? Get off that person's back. That hospital administrator also helped to render first aid to the individual as a trained paramedic, and first and foremost went to that individual first and then sought after the rest. So it really irritates me that people are saying that this hospital administrator should be fired, should be reprimanded, should lose their job. That's their livelihood. And I don't believe that those words that you see in black and white and in print were said the way that you read them.
Everybody wants a scapegoat. Everybody wants somebody to blame.
All right. I'm going to get out my soapbox. Okay. So do I think
Brace yourself.
that, right. Do I think that his choice of words were the greatest?
Terrible.
No. However, I think they were raw. I think they were real. I think they were direct and to the point, which is the way it should be 100% of the time. I think listening to the audio, and I marked on here, I'm going to insert the dispatch audio into this video. Actually, I already have. So for those listening after the fact, you've already heard him. But I think he was extremely calm and he was extremely collective when he was speaking to the 911 dispatcher about the situation, which I think is excellent, and kudos on him for not showing reaction and letting his emotions get the best of him in that situation. That takes a very strong individual to do something like that. Yeah. With that being said, a lot of people don't realize this, and it's not the case everywhere, but across the country, assuming that a dispatch center has adopted this, there is a program that is called emergency medical dispatcher, emergency police dispatcher, and emergency fire dispatcher. These are certifications. Once the department, the city, whatever, has adopted this program, it comes with its own licensure or insurance, if you will, to protect that dispatch center in the case of something happening as a result. In order for that dispatch center to be covered in a situation like that, they have to follow the script to a T. 100%. They cannot ad-lib anything else into the conversation that they want. They have to read it verbatim. If they are dealing with a medical situation and they're following the EMD script and they trail off of the script for any reason, if something happens, they are not protected by the program. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, there have been plenty of times, I'm sure the three of us can all give an example, where we have had to call 911 for a situation. We'll just make it a medical situation. We call 911, and I don't know about you, but I've always started off with, "This is Tyler. I'm an EMT, or I'm a firefighter, or whatever. I've got a patient here that is 33 years old, not breathing, blah, 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 blah. I am starting CPR. This is what's going on, yada, yada, yada." Well, they're going to start asking their questions, right? They're going to ask, is the patient alert? Is the patient breathing? Is the patient whatever? They're going to ask those questions, and I'm going to get irritated because I'm going to be like, look, I already told you I'm an EMT. I already told you I know what I'm doing. I just need you to send help. Now, granted, they've already started sending help by this point. They just have to ask these questions so that they can let the responding personnel know what's going on. And I feel like that was this situation of this CEO. Is that what he was? CEO?
So.
Okay. So regardless of this individual, I feel like that was kind of where he was at. He was like, look, this is the hospital. I've got doctors here. I've got other nurses here. The patient's being taken care of. I don't need an ambulance because the patient's already at the hospital. I need police here to take care of the threat so that I don't have more patients as a result of this individual. I don't think that he was trying to be malicious and say, I don't give two craps about this patient, because quite honestly, who in their right mind would say something like that? That's just not a normal thing. But we've all come to this, from watching being on social media and watching TikTok videos and watching all this other crap on TV. We've all gotten this idea that there are people out there, not saying there's not, but that there's a lot of people out there that don't give two craps about other people. And that's just not, I firmly believe there are far more good people on this earth than there are bad. And I think in this situation, he was just trying to get the point across that I have somebody that's hurt, but that's being taken care of. That's not the situation that I need help with. I need help with police presence. I need this threat taken care of so I don't have any more of these situations.
Yeah,
I can definitely relate with it from that point of view. Just from your description of, calling 911 off duty. I've gone through the same process. Then, okay, well, you're just going to ask me the same questions over again that I just told you. A lot of these dispatchers, not only are they held to a standard because of certain accreditations, licenses, or what have you, they also get evaluated and held accountable at their place of employment for going off script or not answering those questions or asking those questions rather. So
I can tell you, when I worked in the city and county, I don't know that this is still the case today, but I would imagine it is. Our calls were audited every so often. So somebody would actually go and review our previous 911 calls. They would review the radio traffic from when we were dispatching police, fire, or EMS, whatever. Those things were audited. So the dispatchers are held to a very high standard. They don't just run willy-nilly and handle a conversation however they want. Like, they have to follow procedure regardless if they have this certification or not.
Not to discredit those 911 professionals, they did absolutely what they were supposed to do. They started asking the questions that they were supposed to ask. How did they know that this wasn't a mass casualty incident? How did they don't know that. And I guarantee you that hospital administrator is sitting back saying, hindsight, I should have said X, Y, or Z. But that's over now, right? Like, that's not where we are. And I think that if you come out of your office from doing your mundane, whatever it is, daily task, you're working on finances, you're working on whatever, like, they're building a new portion of that hospital. I'm sure that takes a very large portion of his day. Like, I'm sure that walking out in that situation was just complete and utter chaos, right? And so, as you said, he remained calm. He had a demeanor that we got the care that we needed at this facility. We got the people there that needed to be there. I don't know. I think that there are a lot of things, a lot of questions still to be answered about this case, not just about the 911 call.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate, this is not by any means an attack on the dispatcher. The dispatcher did exactly what they were supposed to do. Like you mentioned, how many people, kind of want to be careful how I say this. How many people have called 911 and said, this is going to come across. Okay, this is not meant as an attack. So if you're a dentist, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to attack you. But how many people have called 911 and said, I've got somebody that's in cardiac arrest. It's okay. I'm a doctor, and they're a dentist. Like, I don't doubt that they don't know how to do CPR. I don't doubt that at all. But people call in all the time and they claim they've got XYZ credentials, and they haven't used them. They haven't used those skills in real life. They have no idea what it is that they're doing. So that's why dispatch is trained to be able to go through those procedures. Okay, I want you to place your hands in the center of the patient's chest. I want you to start doing compressions. I am going to count for you, blah, 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 blah. That's why they do that.
Absolutely. Dispatch protocols are there for a reason, because it probably happens somewhere down the line.
Well, the reality of the situation.
I don't blame the dispatcher at all in this situation. I think the dispatcher did everything they were supposed to do, and I don't blame the guy either. I think, his communication came across poor as far as choice of words, but at the end of the day, he was real and wrong. Like, this is not my biggest concern. It's a concern, but that's being taken care of. That situation is being mitigated. It's being taken care of. My concern is this other hazard over here that's potentially going to cause even more injuries or fatalities.
So I think that kind of brings us to, what do we do? What are our communities doing? There's talk of increasing the penalties for folks who injure healthcare workers for workplace violence. And there is the Safety from Violence for Healthcare Employees Act. It's punishable up to 20 years in prison. That's also known as a SAVE Act. And there's a number that goes along with it, like 4-digit number that goes along with it. And I don't have it right this second. But
I think it's House Bill 1120 or something like that.
I don't
Bill
remember.
1120. I don't remember.
That's a different one. This one is bigger. So then if this actually goes into effect, there will be grants for training and equipment provided to institutions. In addition, in the January 23rd Indiana Medical Association Bulletin, there was discussion of supporting Senate Bill 419. It's crimes against healthcare providers. Currently in Indiana, there are penalties for workplace violence, specifically for workers in the emergency department. But this actually would open it up to all healthcare workers, and it would incur level 5 and 6 felonies. So the level 5 felony would be up to 6 years in prison, and the level 6, 2.5 years in prison with up to $10,000 in fines. So the thought process is, if we make our laws more stringent, maybe people will become less violent. I don't know that.
So I guess that's something new to me. I didn't know that all healthcare workers were not covered under some type of a workplace violence law.
Nope.
Right.
I know that EMS and police.
Here. Yeah, that's the case here. Across the country, each state's got different rules. But like Beth was starting to say, EMS and police and fire, we're protected as far as, and I know firsthand of this happening because I've had somebody attack me that, again, I had no intentions of reporting. In fact, it was when I first started and I was working with Mr. Randall here. I had somebody
was the new hire.
Had somebody attack me, and they ended up getting charged with a Class D felony for attacking a public servant.
Yeah, and that is not the case across healthcare. And as I said before, there's currently laws against workplace violence for emergency department workers, but it doesn't translate to the rest of healthcare.
That's surprising to me, actually.
Well, it's unfortunately not 100% surprising to me. And the reason why I say that is because I think a lot of people look at the ER. Obviously, there's more people going in and out of the ER in one day than there are on the floors, patient-wise, not necessarily visitor-wise. And I think they considered okay, so the ER is the biggest potential for an incident occurring. But for whatever reason, it wasn't considered that incidents can occur on the floor. So if somebody like Beth, for example, who not only works in the ER, but works up on the floor, would she fall under the ER protection, or would they'd be like, this happened on the floor, so sorry, it doesn't count. There's not a law for that. And that's a problem. It should be, if you're going to put a law in place, and this is where I recommend anybody that listens to this, you contact your state representative, your state senator, whatever, contact somebody and tell them they need to put some kind of law in place to protect healthcare workers, regardless of what their position is, when they're in a hospital setting or even in a doctor's office, something that's going to protect them, at least legally, if something happens.
So increasing penalties by law is a thought process, right? What do? We increase the penalties. But here we are, educated people that aren't committing acts of violence, and we don't know about these penalties, right? So is an aggressor going to be like, oh, wait, there's a penalty. I probably shouldn't commit this crime, right?
It's like gun laws. Gun laws have worked real well.
There's that new law.
Right.
There's that new law. I'm going to spend 2 extra years in jail if I do this.
Correct. So, this all goes back to training, right? And so Joint Commission is urging no tolerance policies. So zero workplace violence, and they are pushing workplace assessments, monitoring, education and training and response plans. But I just don't feel that I am prepared.
So a zero tolerance policy is the equivalent of slapping a sign on a front door that says no weapons allowed. It doesn't do anything except hinder the honest people, the people that follow the laws. It hinders them from being able to do anything to protect themselves or others. It's absolutely pointless, in my opinion. Now, I know, Beth, you were probably going to talk on this, but I'm just going to go into it again. There are tons of different avenues of what everybody can do to try to get better protection than just listening to me go on my soapbox for nearly 2 hours on this topic. I think the first thing that people need to consider doing is reach out to a facility that offers some kind of self-defense training. I want you to be very careful, though, when you look into this, because there are some people out there that offer self-defense training, and it's absolutely god-awful. I mean, you can go on TikTok and type in self-defense, and there are some people, I'm not going to name the name, everybody knows who I'm talking about, but there are some people that post videos on there, and that's what's going to get you killed instantly if you try any of those techniques. I'm talking doing things like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. There's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Fort Wayne. There's Gracie Jiu-Jitsus across the country. And I'm going to put a plug in. This is not sponsorship. I'm not getting paid in any way to say this, but the individual that runs the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Fort Wayne, his name is Chet. And Chet is a black belt Jiu-Jitsu individual. And he has learned from the Gracies one-on-one, which is very, very rare within the Gracie industry. In fact, I believe, could be wrong, I believe one of the Gracie, I think it was Gracie, the dad, I believe, is the one that gave him his black belt. He earned his black belt from the dad of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I think that's a great place to go to. It's not difficult. They offer women's classes. They offer classes for kids. My kid does it. I do it. I mean, it's a great program, and it's difficult, but it teaches you real world scenarios. You were going to say something?
So I think that that's one of the things. What do you want to invest in yourself and in your coworkers? And I mean, this is all going to take money. It's monetary, but there are some places in our area that provide specific training for essentially, I don't necessarily want to become a jiu-jitsu expert and compete, but I do want to be able to protect myself, whether it be Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, Bashi's Martial Arts, First Shield Defense, Lee Brothers MMA. They all provide some self-defense, specifically just self-defense, not I want to go compete kind of classes, which might be of interest to people. And get your friends together, go together. I talked to the people on the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu on the phone today, and she was like, yeah, we're always interested in getting classes together, and we'd love to support the medical community. Reach out. So I think that self-defense is one of those things. Earlier, well, it was late last year, December of last year, I was involved in a situation where I spent a long time de-escalating a situation and caring for a traumatically injured patient who was in an acute psychosis. And about 3 minutes after I left the room, that individual attacked the people that were in the room. And it was a terrible situation. And I absolutely could have been there 3 minutes earlier. And that still sits with me, and it makes me sick to my stomach. And I think about what could have happened to me in that situation.
We'll go back to what I was talking about with jiu-jitsu. So I know the women's courses and even the beginner courses. First of all, I believe the majority, if not all, of the Gracie locations offer a free trial. So you get 10 days free to try it out. You don't have to worry about a uniform majority of the time. You don't have to worry about that stuff. They provide that during your free trial. At least they do here locally. But I recommend at least giving it a try. When I say that they make it realistic to real world scenarios, they really do. Like when you start, you're sitting there as they are teaching you the moves step by step on how to do everything. And they're telling you when you may run into this situation. And of course, the first rule of everything is try to get out of the situation first. Don't get yourself involved if you don't have to. If you don't have a choice, then they tell you step by step of what to do. But I mean, they offer, like I said, they offer it for kids. They offer it for women specifically, where it's just women in that group. And then they offer it for anybody who wants to climb the belt ladder per se. And, if you want to work your way up to getting a black belt, that's an option too. So
how long have we been talking now?
We're going on over 2 hours. So we've been really going at this.
Ooh.
The last thing I would say is, one of the things that I've done, especially up in the ICU, is I've sat with the girls and guys and I've said, what would you do right now? If somebody was walking down the hall, there's an aggressor, whether they have a firearm or not, like, what would we do? Who would do what? Go. Like, sometimes it's just dialogue, right? Like, not everybody's going to go pay money to go learn self-defense, but you can have dialogue for free and you can talk about the what ifs or what would I do, or it stems ideas, it starts ideas. And that's where this all begins, right? Is from somebody having a little bit of conversation.
No, absolutely. I mean, just little conversations like that, it's better than nothing. I do the same thing with my guys on shift sometimes too. You can do a lot just with a conversation amongst your fellow
scenario.
coworkers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be anything formal, at least to start off with. In fact, I think that's the best way people learn, is when they're learning in a situation like this where it's not formal. We're just having a conversation and talking about what we would do in XYZ situation. I can tell you, if anybody could ever read my mind, that's usually what I'm thinking about of when I'm driving. How would I handle a situation if something happened while I'm driving? Well, I would veer off. Beth probably believes that because she's seen the way that I drive when somebody tries to hit me head on before and was able to get out of that situation. These are things that we should be thinking about. Don't let it consume you, but you should always have some kind of plan, and you should always be prepared for a worst case scenario.
Be aware that the possibility exists.
Right. Don't be naive. Being naive and being complacent, like going back to the very beginning, putting your shoes on every day and going to work and being complacent, it's not the best thing for you. Be aware of your surrounding, be aware of the situations that are occurring in your area, in your unit, whether you're affected by it directly or not. Like, just being aware is key.
Last thing I want to add, just based off of what Cody was saying at the beginning of this, he was asking if there's actually an increase in violence or if it's just getting reported more. And my personal belief, I think it's a little bit of both. I think there has been an increase in violence, but I think we are becoming more aware of it as social media and technology continues to advance. We're getting this information firsthand at a push of a button. So with that being said, regardless if these things are increasing or not, don't, like Beth said, don't be naive. Be aware of your situation. Be aware of your surroundings. Know what to do in as many situations you can think of. With that, I think we're going to wrap this up. We've been going for a little over 2 hours now. So again, check out, obviously, if you're listening on the podcast, I highly, highly encourage you to check this out on YouTube. You can see all of our beautiful faces as we converse with one another. I also recommend that you check out the website, debriefwithtyler.com. On there, we have blog postings, so much stuff on there. Just check it out. That'll continue to advance. I'm hoping within the next few months, I have some exciting news for people that are some of our dedicated listeners. So be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. Cody, any final remarks from you?
Obviously, thoughts with the families involved in all of the incidents that we've discussed. Be aware, like you said, like we've said numerous times, be aware of your surroundings, situational awareness, get out there, get some knowledge, get some training, learn how to protect yourself, because hugs and good vibes won't.
Well said. Beth, anything final from you?
No, thanks for having me again.
I mean, I feel like I'm kind of have to because
You're married to me, yeah.
But
Are you going to edit that part out?
no, it's always good to have you on here and share some insights. So with that, everybody have a safe week. Absolutely. Everybody have a safe week, safe rest of your weekend, and we'll see you. We got 2 awesome guests coming up next week, so be on the lookout for that.
Yep, for sure.
All right. See y'all.